Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ann Cuppinger with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and I welcome you to this afternoon's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about effectively employing and supervising youth care advocates. For those of you who might have missed it, we've had the pleasure of having a team of staff from Youth Power do a couple of other webinars this year. One was on the role of youth care advocates, and another one was on how Youth Power can actually help your organization implement youth care services. We'll put the links to those webinars at the end of the slide deck so you can access them either once the slides are posted, or you can also go to CTAC's website to access those and other webinars. So before we get started, I want to just orient everyone to the WebEx system so that you know how to participate in today's event. If you have not done so already, we recommend that you use the call-in function to listen to the webinar. Usually the sound's a little bit better than if you listen through your computer. When you dial in, you'll be placed on mute, and that's just because we have a large audience and we want to avoid any background noise. If you have any technical issues, you can chat to our host. And the way that you chat is, if you can't see it now, there's a chat box at the bottom right side of your screen, and you open up that chat box by clicking on the blue speech bubble that's at the top right side of the page. And you'll see there's a drop-down list. You can chat to everyone, or you can chat to the host. And our host today is Morgan, and she'll help you with any technical issues. We encourage you to chat questions into the chat box. It helps if you do that along the way. The presenters can see what questions you have, and if we have time at the end of the webinar, we'll respond to your questions, and if we don't have time to respond to all the questions, we'll try to answer them in other ways. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have Azaria Whittakin, Bianca Logan, and Brianna Valsey, all of whom work for Youth Power. We're also joined today by Shannon Fortran, whose work with the New York State Office of Mental Health includes, among many other things, supporting the home and community-based services waiver programs across the state. Azaria is the Youth Care Services Training and Credentialing Coordinator for Youth Power. She is working on developing the training and credentialing for youth care advocates in New York. In her former role, she served as a regional youth partner in the Western region, where she supported, connected, and provided agencies and youth care advocates many opportunities for professional development. Bianca is the Youth Care Services and Training Manager for Youth Power, and in her role, she supports the development of the Youth Care Advocate credential and also supports the implementation of youth care advocates into high-fidelity wraparound programs across the state. In her former role, she was the Youth Engagement Specialist for Monroe County. We have a lot of Western New York representation today, and served on the Youth Power and Families Together boards for 4 years. Brianna Valsey is the Director of Youth Power, and as that Director, she oversees Youth Power's many initiatives and their statewide network. We're one of the few states that has a real true statewide network. Youth Power has a lot to be proud of there. And in her role, she supports the growth of youth care services and increasing youth involvement. Prior to becoming the Director, she worked in a variety of roles for Youth Power, leading opportunities for young people to develop their advocacy skills and providing technical assistance to counties on youth-guided practice. All of this setting the stage for the expansion of youth care services. So I'd like to turn it over now to Shannon Fortran, who would like to offer a few words.
Thank you so much, Ann. That was a very nice introduction. And we're very happy to be partnering with CTAC and Youth Power, and we truly appreciate these partnerships, as Ann just outlined. We have a wealth of knowledge today and experience. So as Ann had indicated, part of my role here at the Division of Integrated Community Services for Children and Families, the Office of Mental Health, is to oversee the statewide 1915C SED Home and Community-Based Service Waiver. If there are waiver providers listening today, they could certainly tell you that as of September last year, this service, Youth Peer Advocacy, was added to our waiver service array as a Medicaid billable service, which we were very excited about. Granted, it being a new service, that certainly require trainings and some startup, certainly for folks that don't already have that service in place through other means. And as such, we're learning a lot. It's a relatively new service, but what I'm most excited about for today's presentation is not just the applicability of this information for today's 1915C waiver providers, but also for the new Children Family Treatment and Support Services, formerly known as SPA. So, you know, Youth Power was very mindful to make this information universal in today's world as well as the future world. So we're very excited about that, and that this information applies, you know, not just to employing youth peer advocates as staff, but also the administrative, agency, and supervisory level considerations associated with this service and the merits associated with employing and offering this service to recipients. So I'm very excited and very much happy to be here today, so thank you for attending. So I'm going to turn it over to our partners at Youth Power, and thank you for attending.
Oh, thank you. Hi, this is Azaria. Today we will be briefly touching, oops, sorry, I forgot to change my slide. Okay, today we'll be touching on the youth peer advocate role and supporting your organizational readiness. Agency policy, we'll be discussing agency policy considerations, some supervision, and provide you with in-service training recommendations and additional resources. So, the youth peer advocate role is a mix of formal and informal services and support provided to young people ages 14 through 21 under the current 1915C waiver. But moving forward, that restriction will be lifted, but we expect and encourage providers to provide the service in consideration of both the youth's developmental and chronological age, which has been recommended as 14 to 21. Services are available to young people experiencing social, medical, emotional, developmental, substance use, and/or behavioral challenges in their home, school, placement, and/or community-centered services. These services provide the training and support necessary to ensure engagement and active participation of the young person in the treatment planning process through ongoing implementation and reinforcement of skills. Youth peer advocate activities must be intended to develop and achieve the identified goals and/or objectives agreed upon in the young person's individualized care plan. The structured activities provided by this service emphasize the opportunity for the young person to expand the skills and strategies necessary to move forward in their personal, individualized life goals, develop self-advocacy skills, and support their transition into adulthood. So, as an example, the Youth Peer Advocate works with Johnny. Johnny is a high school junior who has not been attending his Committee on Special Education, so his CSE meetings, because they upset him. So he agrees to work with a youth peer advocate to assist him in verbalizing his goals, practicing self-advocacy skills, and receiving, accepting, and providing feedback. So Johnny has an upcoming CSE meeting and invites his youth peer advocate to support him at the meeting. The youth peer advocate may attend the CSE meeting with Johnny and his caregiver to support him in utilizing his new skills and verbalizing his goals at the meeting. Youth peer advocates provide training and support to young people so they are able to be active participants in all areas of their treatment, including planning and implementation. Youth peer advocates provide structured, scheduled activities that emphasize the opportunity for young people to expand their skills and strategies necessary to move forward in meeting their personal, individualized goals, develop self-advocacy skills, and their transitions into adulthood. So community connections and natural supports. Youth peer advocates work to foster community connections and natural supports. They do this by supporting young people to develop a network of people in the community and resources that can provide the young person with information and natural support. These connections support a young person's long-term wellness. In addition, youth peer advocates facilitate youth peer resiliency and recovery support groups that can further support a young person's connection to their community and natural peer support. Youth peer advocates provide skill building by promoting wellness skills, goal-setting skills, community living skills, and skills necessary to independently navigate service systems. Youth peer advocate skill building focuses specifically on supporting young people to develop skills and resources to cope with and manage their psychiatric symptoms, trauma, and substance use disorders. Coaching. Youth peer advocates work to enhance a young person's resiliency, recovery-oriented attitude, such as their ability to be hopeful, confident, and speak up for themselves and what they need. Youth peer advocates further coach young people by modeling appropriate wellness skills, such as providing mutual support, being hopeful, and providing reassurance in their own advocacy. This includes them sharing their own personal recovery or resiliency stories. Engagement, bridging, and transition support. As a youth peer advocate provides a relationship of mutuality, allowing them to partner with a young person, supporting them through life and service transitions. Being closer in age to the young person and also being in a professional role allows youth peer advocates the opportunity to act as a bridge for young people and service providers, fostering the breakdown of service barriers. Self-advocacy, self-efficacy, and empowerment. Youth peer advocates work with young people to develop self-advocacy skills, assisting them in gaining and regaining the ability to make independent choices. Youth peer advocates develop, link, and facilitate access to formal and informal services such as community support groups and other community resources. They serve as an advocate, mentor, or facilitator. Youth peer advocates assist youth in navigating the system, developing skills to advocate for needed services and benefits. They assist youth in understanding their treatment plan and help ensure the plan is family-centered. While some of the services offered may appear to overlap with other services, youth peer advocates have a unique ability to engage youth and young adults at a deeper level due to their own personal experiences. They provide a sense of hope to young people, their family, and service providers. They are able to effectively model and support skills to manage resiliency and recovery, advocacy, and empowerment. Additionally, peer support is evidence-based on research studies that support the effectiveness of working with someone with shared experience. I'm going to pass now to Bianca.
All right, now that you've learned a bit about the youth peer advocate role and some of the services that they provide, we're going to talk about some of the challenges to implementation. And we want to frame this in a way of really developing awareness of these challenges because there are solutions to the challenges, but we want to talk about what they are so you're aware first. So before we can discuss solutions, it's important to develop the awareness of the challenges faced when implementing youth peer services. Knowing the challenges means that we are best able to identify the solutions. Many of these will be discussed as we move forward in the following slides in talking about organizational readiness and considerations in structuring the role. And we will provide resources to support you in this process. Job and experience. Since this may be the first professional position for a young person, they may need additional support in understanding responsibilities, expectations, and adapting to workplace norms, including communications and attire. Youth peer advocates are also in recovery and may be managing their own wellness while also providing support to young people facing a similar transition to adulthood. The youth peer advocate role itself can also be challenging. For example, in practicing mutuality, youth peer advocates must learn to balance respect for a young person's privacy with their duty to inform when a young person displays evidence of safety risks to themselves or others, or engages in high-risk behaviors that are negatively impacting engagement and or the progress toward their goals. Workplace culture often prevents serious challenges to youth peer job success. Because their very presence on treatment teams challenges the existing clinical models and methods of service. Many providers value a clinical approach involving professional expertise, relational boundary maintenance, and risk averseness, while peer support relies on a culture of informality, disclosure, and collaborative problem solving. Historically accepted clinical models view the sharing of personal stories with individuals as taboo and harmful, driven by the belief that individuals come to professionals to share their struggles and not the reverse. While alternatively, youth peer advocates sharing their stories strategically has been developed as a tool of hope for both the young person and their families. Youth peer advocates also offer a unique professional experience that may not align with individuals' beliefs as to what constitutes expertise. Historically, the youth peer role has been defined in many different ways, and staff may not have been educated on working with peers who bring a different perspective to the service delivery. Provider staff often need clarity on the specific duties and expectations of the peer role and may have concerns about the impact the introduction of the peer role has on their own job, both in the treatment process and employment hierarchy. By avoiding role confusion, we can better support the integration of peers on many levels, including decisions regarding the plan of care to just standard office procedures. We will discuss more in regards to these solutions as we move forward in these slides. Stigma. Additionally, recent research shows that at least some provider employees discriminate against peer staff and attribute stereotypes and labels to those individuals. Most commonly, the belief that peers lack necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities for employment, and that they are more costly to employ. This is not true. It is not uncommon for youth peer advocates to report that their workplace is unsupportive of their work and their success, making it of the utmost importance for supervisors to be prepared to evaluate and navigate workplace culture and how to be proactive in ensuring stigma does not negatively impact youth peer advocates. So next we're going to talk about organizational readiness. This is a huge point at which you take on youth peer advocates in your organization. So how do you ensure that your agency and organization is ready to integrate or is actually successfully integrating youth peer advocates? We recommend that you conduct a self-evaluation to determine what you currently have in place and what further steps are needed to get ready to integrate or further support the integration of youth peer advocates. Tools and supports are available through Youth Power's technical assistance and regionally. There is no way of bringing on a youth peer role. There is no one way of bringing on a youth peer role. While there may be some initial considerations for all, which we're going to be discussing as we move forward, each agency and organization has very unique needs and considerations when establishing the role. Fortunately, though, there are also unique supports available to guide you through this process, including Youth Power Technical Assistance, which is individualized based on the needs at the organization. Some questions you might ask yourself when first considering hiring youth peer advocates are, what is my level of youth involvement now? What does it look like? How are we currently engaging youth and families? How is input from young people utilized now? Do all staff understand and engage in youth-guided practice? It's important to also conduct ongoing assessments and evaluations to support you in identifying what you are doing well and what steps can be taken to further support the success of implementing youth peer services. And I'm going to turn it over to Brianna.
Thanks, Bianca. So now that we've talked about that introduction, how do we conceptualize and bring on this role? We mentioned before some of the initial considerations, so we're going to go through this. What are those initial questions that you need to ask yourself that maybe you're not sure that you even know all the questions? I know sometimes I find myself in that position. So first and foremost, establishing the key elements of the youth peer advocate role in the context of your agency first. So what do you want youth peer support to look like in the context of your agency, and how will you review that implementation as it rolls out? and who would be involved in that review? How many youth peer advocates does your agency aim to integrate? We recommend that at least 2 youth peer advocates are important for infusing the youth peer advocate perspectives in your agency. How many hours will youth peer advocates work each week? And will this be uniform across youth peer advocates or negotiable on an individual basis? And then also, who will supervise the youth peer advocates? You'll also want to consider sustainability early on. So what funding do you have or need in order to support this role? And what training and credentialing needs are required of the youth peer advocates prior to be hired, and what can be completed while employed? You'll also want to consider how your agency will match youth peer advocates with young people. So developing a clear protocol for how young people are referred to and matched with youth peer advocates. Integrating choice and flexibility as much as possible in the matching process and developing that clear process for how young people are referred to is very important, and it's important to also avoid assumptions and bias by making matches based solely on elements of diversity, such as race and gender, and instead support a matching process that includes the voice of the identified young person. You'll want to determine how much youth peer support mimics other team members' activities with the young person. And the youth peer support and other team members' activities should really complement each other. So how are they coordinating those efforts and who's responsible for what? Communication among team members is necessary in order to ensure that the expertise of the youth peer advocate role is both valued and differentiated from other roles. You'll want to minimize youth peer advocate role confusion as well. When expectations are not made clear to staff, when expectations are made clear to staff, it can foster a more supportive workplace for all. When it's not, it can add to job confusion and conflict. So in order to avoid role confusion, you'll want to define the specific responsibilities of the peer role and refine those responsibilities systematically. Write a clear youth peer advocate job description, and then also provide resources for young people and their families to clarify the youth peer advocate role and what's available. You might consider having a kickoff event where the youth peer advocate role is clearly explained to all staff and offer an opportunity for questions and insights. You'll want to incorporate a description of the youth peer advocate role and how that role enhances agency culture and individual outcomes and the agency's new employee orientation. So figuring out how this information is also provided in the staff orientation process to ensure that everyone in the workplace has a full understanding of the role and how everyone fits together and how what services are offered complement each other.
Hello, this is Zari again. Mutuality, oh, we got behind a little bit. We had some technical difficulties. Okay. So mutuality must exist to a certain extent for peer support to work. When considering employing a youth peer advocate, a major concern lies within the boundaries of the youth peer advocate relationship with the young person and concerns about inappropriate relationships that may occur due to proximity and age. This fear is not necessarily negative, but it is important to explore why this fear exists. The youth peer advocate's relationship with the young person is about collaboration, empathy, authenticity, trust, and mutuality. By acknowledging this fear, you are able to create opportunities for all staff to process their perspectives and support them in navigating the boundaries within each of their roles. Draft policies within your agency about the key aspects of healthy relationships for all staff to adhere to. For youth peer advocates, ensure that these policies are introduced during their orientation and that the youth peer advocate and their supervisor process them together. The youth peer advocate's relational boundaries with the young person they work with may be impacted by overlapping social networks. Youth peer advocates, with the support of their supervisor, must be prepared to discuss the potential for community encounters during off hours and how young people prefer they describe their relationships. Supervisors should also encourage youth peer advocates to tell them when they run into young people in the community during off hours to support continued discussions on how to address those situations. By having this as a standard process or procedure and expectations from the beginning, it creates clarity and supports the development of healthy boundaries. Social media is an important and effective way of communicating with young people and may be their primary method of communication. Each agency should have a policy on social media interactions and review those policies with youth peer advocates and young people. Agencies should support youth peer advocates in creating professional social media accounts for engaging young people. Texting is another important method of communication for young people. A simple document to guide conversation about texting etiquette and cell phone boundaries is highly beneficial. Additionally, agencies should consider policies and procedures regarding supplying youth peer advocates with a work phone to support boundaries and personal self-care. Youth peer advocates should also discuss boundaries regarding availability and purpose of contact to ensure clarity and transparency with the young person. Before hiring and onboarding a youth peer advocate, it is important that as an agency, you are ready. Having a clear job description will save the agency from roadblocks such as role confusion and misunderstanding of the position. As an agency, you want to consider if youth peer advocates need or should have their own transportation due to geographic location, safety, confidentiality, efficiency, and how to best support the youth and families in your service area. Additionally, agencies need to have a good orientation process for onboarding that clearly recognizes and addresses barriers to the position. Orientation should consider and clarify the youth peer advocate's role within the agency, set clear boundaries and definitions of what they can and cannot do in their position. Youth peer advocates need to know and be aware of possible role confusion so that they can set clear boundaries within their role. This includes clarifying and considering reimbursements for services and other youth peer advocate financial responsibilities. Youth peer advocates are mandated reporters. They should have coaching on how to clarify what this means with youth and families on day one, along with clarifying the uniqueness of their role as a peer. Many youth peer advocates struggle with progress notes and note-taking. It will be helpful to provide youth peer YPAs with examples of good progress notes and also support them with improving progress notes over time in supervision. Again, have clear policies on communication, boundaries, and policies for social media and texting. We suggest that as youth peer advocates are beginning in their role, that they are provided with the opportunities to shadow care coordinators during home visits. This allows for opportunities for on-the-job coaching. I'm now going to pass it back to Bianca, and she will talk to you about supervising youth peer advocates.
All right, so we've kind of set the tone or foundation for considerations. Supervisors have a unique role overseeing the mentoring the youth peer advocates, many of whom will be new to this type of professional role. The goal of the youth peer advocate supervisor is to be a coach, mentor, and sounding board for youth peer advocate innovation and on-the-job struggles. Supervision of youth peer advocates must be multidimensional. So we've laid out supervision types into 4 categories, and we're going to take a look at those categories. Clinical supervision supports the skills and effectiveness of the youth peer advocate, including understanding the clinical components and approaches to working effectively as a youth peer advocate in the context of the plan of care of the youth and family. Administrative supervision addresses on-the-job performance, organization, time management, barriers to performing job duties, and expectations adherence to agency policies. Consider this as traditional supervision, what most people think of. Coaching is a combination of informal and formal supports. This is very unique. I often talk about the fine line of coaching and supervision. This is done by supporting the youth peer advocates in building on-the-job resilience through self-care, processing challenging workplace situations, supporting intra-office communication, modeling and providing instruction on professionalism in the workplace, and providing resources for maintaining health and wellness on the job. For many youth peer advocates, the job is personal, and often supervision requires that personal element that respects privacy while also allowing the opportunity to reflect on how these personal elements impact their ability to perform the essential functions of the job, and how they are also strengths in performing the essential functions of the job. Group supervision is providing supervision for multiple youth peer advocates to address common themes, challenges, jointly led activities of the youth peer advocates, team building, and professional development. Group supervisions are a powerful way to support mutuality in peer-to-peer relationships and provide a forum for skill development through many workshops hosted by supervisors, guests, and the youth peer advocates themselves. It's important to note that supervision is not therapy. If a youth peer advocate consistently brings personal struggles to supervision, supervisors should encourage and support youth peer advocates in seeking appropriate support. However, supervisors do not want to prevent the sharing of any personal life experiences. That's how we connect, and it's an important role of that, connecting with your supervisor. It is healthy to talk about hobbies, interests, and even personal struggles with coworkers at times. As a supervisor, your role is to support the youth peer advocate in reframing their life experiences in order to better engage and motivate the young people they work with. If the majority of supervision is spent on processing the youth peer advocate's personal life struggles, instead of focusing on how to use these experiences as strengths to increase support and engagement of young people, the supervisor needs to set clear boundaries and help the youth peer advocate understand that supervision is not the place for this, and increase the structure of the supervision meetings. When personal mental health challenges and/or an inability to cope with on-the-job stress continually gets in the way of job performance, supervisors should work with the youth peer advocate to develop a reasonable and effective accommodation, and/or connect them with additional resources such as the agency's Employee Assistance Program. We have some recommendations on supervision frequency that we found effective from youth peer advocates that we've worked with. So supervision of youth peer advocates is effective when it's scheduled in advance and occurs regularly, the same time and place each week or bi-weekly. In order to be successful, it's important for youth peer advocates to have a specified time and place to process and reflect upon their work experiences. Ideally, youth peer advocates partner with supervisors to set the supervision agenda, time, and designated time should be set aside at the start of supervision to make sure to follow up on anything that was identified or important from previous supervision meetings. Both individual and group supervision can be beneficial for youth peer advocates. Ideally, the youth peer advocate meets bi-weekly or a minimum of monthly for group supervision. In general, it's important to support youth peer advocates in connecting with other youth peer advocates whenever possible. The feedback that I've gotten from some of the youth peer advocates we're working with under the system of care is that that's the most beneficial for them. Frequent informal check-ins and supervisor availability for impromptu check-ins are key for on-the-job youth peer advocate success. Having an open door policy or otherwise ensuring that supervisors are present and available really fosters a sense of security on and off the job site. And it can happen through a variety of forms, such as in-person interactions, phone calls, or texting. The check-in should not feel like monitoring, but instead like a consultation. I'm going to turn it over to Brianna.
Thank you. So when talking about supervision, what are some of those priority areas? And I think a key point to remember when thinking about supervising youth peer advocates and any peer position too, is that effective supervision is reflective. Reflective supervision aims to increase empathy, integrate multiple perspectives, and the youth peer advocate's own self-awareness. This form of supervision examines the parallel processes between how the youth peer advocate interacts with young people and how the youth peer advocate interacts with their supervisors. So as a supervisor, you support the youth peer advocate in reflecting on their role with young people, including exploring their actions, thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and reactions to the work with young people. Through regularly scheduled supervision, supervisors want to explore how the youth peer advocates maintaining healthy boundaries, how they're being proactive in preventing secondary trauma and prepared to address it should it occur. They should also explore how to navigate the parent-youth relationship and the overall family dynamic, looking at the larger picture and family structure. They will also need to be adequately informed on how and when they should contact their supervisor outside of regular supervision and connect with additional supports, such as Youth Power's Peer Leader Support and Development Group, which is a opportunity for youth peer advocates across the region to connect with one another to explore different challenges and successes. It's also important to identify those boundaries for yourself too. So thinking about when you prefer to be contacted and how, and what that looks like outside of supervision. So what does that successful supervision dynamic look like? For supervisors and youth peer advocates, there's both elements that they need to bring to the table in order for that relationship to be effective. So supervisors viewing the youth peer advocate as an employee rather than through a diagnostic lens. Referring back to that idea that supervision should not be therapy. Setting boundaries and connecting to additional supports to avoid falling into the role of a therapist, and recognizing the value of the youth peer advocate's recovery story and experience without disclosing those experiences for the youth peer advocates to others. What youth peer advocates should bring to supervisions is their own perspective, voices, and ideas, and not expecting supervisors to completely structure their job. They should balance self-care with responsibilities and identify and address secondary traumatic stress. They should also bring their own experience to support sharing their story and providing hope for young people and the future of the youth peer movement. Both youth peer advocates and their supervisors should be knowledgeable on the youth peer movement, history, and current best practices in youth peer support in order for supervision to be effective. If youth peer advocates are not in a good place in their recovery, it impacts their ability to support other young people. So supporting through coaching, but not doing it for them, and holding them accountable to the expectations and standards set within personnel policies, and making those expectations clear is crucial. Balancing the flexibility necessary without compromising the professional role and expectations. So what are some initial discussions and supervision practices? First, you'll want to discuss the role and expectations for supervision. So what does that look like? You'll want to discuss confidentiality and boundaries, the frequency of contact, so how frequently you would be meeting, what the essential qualities of the supervisor are and the supervisee, so some of those elements that we talked about in that last slide, so what both parties need to bring to the table in order to be effective. You'll also want to normalize the process for conflict resolution. So making sure that all staff feel comfortable in following whatever process is set forth for conflict resolution, and that they feel as though they can come to their supervisor should there be any issues in order to address them in a timely manner. You'll also want to discuss how to strive towards mutuality and recognize the power differentials that the youth peer advocates have in their professional role and the challenges in service systems. During supervision, you'll also want to set goals and utilize agendas.
Now we're going to talk about in-service training recommendations. So anything that youth peer advocates are trained in, supervisors should be trained in as well in order to effectively support youth peer advocates. This includes getting clarification on service scope and billing requirements, how to function within a team, including having knowledge of all the services available within the agency and knowing when to refer to other team members to eliminate role confusion. Knowledge on incident reporting, crisis de-escalation, suicide prevention, domestic violence, and signs and interventions. motivational and interviewing and personal safety in the community also. So we have some additional resources for you. Youth Power, our regional youth partners provide technical assistance to support agencies looking to hire youth peer advocates. They facilitate meetings to support supervisors of youth peer advocates, providing them a place to problem solve through our YPAL meetings. So that's our Youth Peer Advocate Leaders meetings. And regional youth partners also facilitate meetings with youth peer advocates to provide opportunities for professional development and networking with other youth peer advocates and our peer leader support and development meetings, which is pleased. So pleased is where youth peer advocates come and speak with other youth peer advocates around professional development opportunities. And our Youth Peer Advocate Leaders meetings are specifically for supervisors, where they're also able to come and discuss some roadblocks that they're having and kind of brainstorm around ways to move forward and support each other just with the movement altogether. The Learning and Working Center transitions ACR through the University of Massachusetts Medical School provides resources through their publication on effectively employing young adult peer providers. It's a toolkit. There are other resources there on how to structure the youth peer advocate role, establishing a culture that supports the role, recruiting, hiring, training, and supervision. This can all be accessed through their publications tab on their website that's provided there for you. I'd like to open it up for some questions now.
Hi, this is Ann back again. I want to thank our Youth Power team for this really thorough, wonderful presentation, which is informed by so much great experience. I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but if I'll tell you a couple of other things, and while we have that conversation, if some questions come in, we do have a little bit of time. I would really encourage, Azaria mentioned the regional youth partners, and of course there's the whole statewide Youth Power team. This group has a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom about how to prepare an organization to be ready to employ youth peer advocates, to look at where to do outreach, how to think about interviews and hiring and all of the kinds of steps that you need to take to bring youth peer advocates on board. And they are, they're really just a pleasure to work with, and are, I think, especially good at, you know, kind of listening to your organization's individual needs and matching their knowledge and the knowledge of their network to those needs to help you move forward. A couple things I want to just point out. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these slides will be posted in a couple days on the CTAC website. If you go onto the website and you look under the events, you know, the tab where you can find our calendar, and on today's date, you'll eventually find these slides and a recording of the webinar posted. And on this slide, you'll see there's a link to 2 of the webinars that we did earlier in the year. You know, pretty soon you'll be seeing the launch of the Youth Peer Advocate training and credentialing process. And those training modules will be available not only to the young people seeking to be credentialed as youth peer advocates, but to others who want to better understand, you know, what training they're receiving and their role. So I just wanted to tell you about those things, and I know Shannon wanted to say a couple of other things before we signed off.
Thank you so much, Ann, and thank you, folks at Youth Power. Great information, great resources. We truly appreciate it. So from a state perspective, I just really want to emphasize the significance of the youth peer advocacy role, not just today in current practice, but moving forward. So back in September last year, the 1915 Scene Waiver had expanded their enrollment age from 18 to 21. So that was exciting for us for two reasons. One, you know, it expanded the age range, right? But it also allowed for transition-aged youth to access services that they might have not before and have continuity of care with the providers that they were receiving services with prior to the age of 18. So with the introduction of youth peer advocacy, that really allowed us to kind of meet these needs of these transition-age youth that we might have not considered in the children's serving system previously. So I think that this information that Youth Power presented today is doubly critical because moving forward, that age range to 21 will continue with the state plan services, the Children, Family Treatment and Support Services. So I think the federal government, New York State, definitely agreed that there was a need. And I think that need is certainly around engaging with youth peer advocates and transition-aged youth, and you know, having adolescents that might not have family resources, might not have a large array of community resources at their disposal when they come to receive services with providers. And how do you engage these youth? How do you get them to the table to have conversations about their treatment and get them invested in that? And I think that Youth Power has been doing an excellent job at really informing us, working with New York State on educating us on the very merit of that and why youth peer advocacy is so important, because it helps get these youth to the table. It helps them to engage in their own service provision, and it really helps them through their own lived experiences to understand the significance of their treatment and the significance of advocating for themselves and really being an active partner in their decisions, you know, because I think that historically children serving agencies have really relied on the parent relationship as being the leader of treatment planning. And I think that we have to kind of reassess that for especially our transition-aged youth, and that is why this service is just so critical for that. So we're very excited that it's here today, but also that it's going to continue in the future. And I truly appreciate Youth Power and CTAC for bringing this to us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. We have a couple of questions. So the first question is, does Youth Power have a job description that you might be able to share with folks?
So youth peer advocate, sorry, go ahead, Bianca.
So we are working on creating a job description that's generalized and that can be used standard for the youth peer advocate role. For organizations that are starting to create a job description, we recommend consulting the SPA and checking out the services that we also outlined in our PowerPoint here today, and being able to look at the job requirements, because that can also be turned into a job description, which is what we will be doing soon.
The regional youth partners also have worked with a number of agencies in their region on creating some different job descriptions. So through the technical assistance, they might be able to offer recommendations and examples from what they have done with other agencies in the meantime while we work on developing a statewide example.
Thanks. We also have several people asking about best practices and approaches for recruiting applicants for positions as youth peer advocates, and any guidance you might have on that.
Certainly. So I think first and foremost, recognizing that the young people you serve may very well be the next youth peer advocate. So the more that you work to initiate youth advisory and leadership groups within your agency and organization and build up that next generation, you can also utilize existing movement events and activities to draw in new people, so connecting with the youth movement as a whole, and building an understanding and connection to the social justice and civil rights movement. So how to reach young people who may not otherwise be reached through these traditional services, and how they can use their experiences to connect in that way, and just knowledge on the role. So the more that you get out there and promote what this opportunity means and how young people are able to use, like, the value of their lived experience that they bring to this role. So I think those are a couple different ways that you could do it. I'm not sure if there's anything Bianca or Zaria would like to add to that.
Yeah, the number one thing that I usually tell people, which I'm glad Brianna started off with it as well, is think about the young people you're working with that are at that transition age, or they might not be. They might also be, you know, a teenager in their mid-teens that is really showing leadership skills and is openly sharing about their recovery and progress that they've made and is able to be motivational to their peers. In general, those are the gems that you're going to see potentially in the future youth leadership. So I really encourage providers to think about those young people that you're just sitting in your office and you're like, wow, that young person's really making a difference, or wow, that young person's come a long way. Because they make really meaningful youth peer advocates and are able to provide that hope and connection for other peers. I know one thing that has been recommended that I think we want people to be mindful of is I've worked with organizations that recruit on college campuses. I think that's something to do cautiously and carefully because we don't necessarily, the youth peer advocate role is not a social worker, is not a therapist, and we want to be mindful that they are there in that peer role. And some, I've seen where some folks who are in college or have just graduated take on the youth peer advocate role, and kind of some drift happens in that role, and they seem to be more of a therapist in doing for the young person versus the true model of youth peer advocates, which is doing with and really based in that peer role. Sometimes there's too much of a distance from their own experiences, but sometimes not as well, and they offer professional experience from their college experience.
A good opportunity for you, young people that you're working with too, is connecting them to Youth Power. We provide a lot of opportunities for that leadership and advocacy development for young people. We would like to kind of start that foundation for young people and get them interested in being youth peer advocates. So we provide a lot of those opportunities ourselves. You can always sign up for our e-news and things like that to see what's available and what's going on. Locally, we have events throughout New York State that are really great opportunities to get young people involved and interested in advocacy.
Thanks. We have a question coming from someone who works for a federally qualified health center, and they're asking, they're saying that there are people that they really want to involve in this conversation weren't able to be on the webinar today, and they're wondering if either through Youth Power statewide or regional youth partners, you would be able to meet individually with an organization to share some of this information.
Absolutely. We are definitely available for different presentations, workshops. Our regional youth partners, beyond their technical assistance, offer different workshops and presentations as well. So connect with them, and you could also just contact our info@youthpowerny.org email to be directed to the most appropriate person. And we can really customize whatever presentation needs and information needs you have.
And also remember, this webinar is recorded, so it'll be accessible after. And we will have more webinars coming in the future as well regarding youth peer advocates and the rollout. So to keep a lookout for that resource as well.
Yeah, I'd encourage everyone who's not already signed up for the CTAC and MCTAC listservs to do that through our website or by sending an email to ctac.info@nyu.edu. And that way you'll be added to the distribution list for future announcements on this and other topics. So we have several questions around the time frame and the training and what's going to be included in the training for youth peer advocates. One person noted that mandated reporter training is necessary, but what other kind of training is required? And maybe you can talk a little bit about time frames and credentialing.
So I think one thing we do want to note is that while the Youth Peer Advocate credential is training youth peer advocates to know their role and to be a youth peer advocate, there are a lot of unique training opportunities, some of which we recommended early on in our slides, that are region-specific or agency-specific. We are providing this credential in the area of expertise of the youth peer advocate role. So something like motivational interviewing or domestic violence or mandated reporting would all be done on a local level or regional, and our regional youth partners and the parent advocates and our OMH field offices are super helpful in sharing when those opportunities come along. And as we build our communications for the rollout of this, we hope to be able to have a platform to share those resources so that you can get connected. And I'll turn it over to Azaria to talk a little about timeframes for the credential in general.
So the credential will be available later this year, and it will be billable in January of 2020. So as the Youth Peer Advocate progresses through the credentialing, there's level 1 of the Youth Peer Advocate credential, which is online. Level 2 consists of an online component as well as an in-person component. After the Youth Peer Advocate finishes level 1, they will be provisionally credentialed, and they can become fully credentialed after completing all of level 1 and level 2 in the in-person.
And there's also additionally continuing education credits that have to be completed on a regular basis, as well as letters of reference for the credential as well. All of that will be out on our website.
Yep, so one thing to clarify, one thing to clarify is that the credential is being completed this year, and we will be announcing when the credential is actually available for individuals to engage in later on. So that announcement will be made available for everyone. In the meantime, though, for youth peer advocates that are providing services through the waiver services, as well as others who may be interested in providing those services, we do have a waiver youth peer advocate training that's required in order for them to bill for services. It includes both an in-person and online component. We have one that will be coming up in the Western region. That is, the registration information will be announced shortly. And up to 20 young people, we have availability for up to 20 young people to participate in that training. So priority is given to those who are currently serving as waiver youth peer advocates. And there are additional spots available for those who are interested in becoming youth peer advocates and receiving the training while waiting for the credential.
Thank you, Brianna. This is Shannon Fortran again. I just want to clarify on a point that Azaria made about the billing until 2020. Youth peer advocacy is a billable service in fee-for-service Medicaid today through the 1915C and will continue to be so after January 1st. In 2020 is when it will be converting to managed care. So it will continue to be a billable service. That doesn't take away from the points you made regarding the training, certainly, but it will be a billable service and continue to be so in the future.
I noticed that we've reached the end of our time, and we have so many questions, conversations we can continue to have. I'll address one very quickly. Someone asked about the credentials for supervisors of youth peer advocates, and I would encourage you to keep your eyes peeled for a soon-to-be-released provider training manual. There's a manual that's going to come out related to the SPA, or as they're now called, Children and Family Treatment and Support Services. And one of those services is youth peer support, and you will find within that provider manual, specific guidelines around the criteria for supervisors. I'm sorry, due to time, we'll have to leave a couple of other questions on the table, including one that really should be the basis for a future webinar, which is to have youth peer advocates share with us their current experience around their role and their contribution. So I thank whoever chatted that question in for the suggestion, and I think we'll make that the topic of a future webinar where we can bring some youth peer advocates on to talk about the work that they do, as well as their colleagues in whatever organization they work for. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and I want to thank all of our presenters. And I encourage you to share this presentation with your colleagues and sign up for our listserv so you can hear about upcoming presentations on youth peer support and the work of youth peer advocates. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.